Hello, hello. Mike Smeltzer
Hello.
here.
There we go.
Yeah, all right. Thanks everybody for coming tonight. This is a presentation on workflow in .NET Nuke. We're going to talk about how we can empower our end users while also protecting our website. I'm going to start by talking about what workflows are in general and how they relate in .NET Nuke and why they're important, or why I think they're important in your content delivery lifecycle. Going to show you how to create them in DNN and how to use them in a custom module. I'm going to do a really high-level API review, just basically mentioning the names of what they are, but then we'll show a demonstration module that I built that shows workflows implemented. Talk about next steps and how we can get more adoption for workflows, and then open discussion. Obviously, questions throughout this pretty casual, so just bring them up if you want to, or we can wait to the end and just have an open discussion. So a general definition of workflows. I Googled that last night and came up with a bunch of different answers, but all relate to the same thing, which is essentially a sequence of events that occurs when a work item or a process is initiated, and then it stops when that process is ended. So if we think about workflows in .NET Nuke, that could be anything from creating a page. That's a process that's starting, and when the page is fully created, that's finished. It could be adding a module to a page, uploading a file, or even changing content or deleting content within a module itself. If you download DNN today, we do have workflows in varying flavors. There's the HTML module, which comes with workflows. If you go to the settings screen on a module, you can see, I think, 2 or 3 workflows by default that come shipped in .NET Nuke. There isn't a UI, I believe, at this point that lets you change those workflows, but you can change them from the database. Evoke has workflows as well. I'm pretty sure you can, at a page level, put a whole page's changes through an approval process. And there are also some third-party modules out there which I've come across in the past, but in my recent searches, I can't find any that are at least publicizing, that they have workflow enabled. So we got a couple different varieties of workflows there, but then we also have what I'm calling the DNN Core Workflow API. So in version 7.4, which I think is about 3 years ago, workflow APIs were added into the core. The HTML module, which comes with DNN out of the box, today that does not use the core workflows. It uses its own workflows built in its own code. I'm not sure if Evoke uses the core ones or not. I'm assuming they do. And in regards to other third-party modules, I haven't come across any, at least in my experience, that I know use these APIs. So from my standpoint, I think we're at a point where we've got a workflow system at a core level that's been implemented for a few years, but not a whole lot of wide adoption at this point. So they haven't been widely adopted yet. So why are they important? If they're not important, why haven't we used them yet? Well, I think if you look at workflows from all stakeholders' perspectives, whether that stakeholder is a content editor, if it's a manager of a department, the owner of the website, the owner of a company, maybe those roles are all one person in a very small business. Maybe they are, spread over dozens in a larger corporation. Each of those stakeholders from content delivery perspective has a stake, and our CMS, in this case DNN, has a big role to play there. In my experience, there's a lot of times where you have people that are new to DNN or just new to this implementation, this website on DNN, and not everyone has a lot of development and internal environments for testing and things like that. Definitely, I'm sure people do, but not everyone does. Some people spin on the site, and there you go. That doesn't leave a lot of room for people to learn and test the CMS out. In today's world, for the majority of solutions that I've come across, You edit something, you publish it, and it is live right away. So if you start adding things to pages, yes, you can use permissions to hide things, for sure, and mock things up that way. But not everyone does that. Not always an intuitive way of doing it either. So it really limits the options for people just to test the CMS, adding things to pages, creating things in a production environment, mind you, and learn how the site works without potentially impacting a live web property. Workflows also give you the ability to protect your website, company protection. That can be in a variety of different manners. It can be as simple as your brand identity. So by using workflows, we have the ability to review and approve content changes before they go live. So if someone puts up incorrect content that impacts your company or your client's companies negatively, there could be a bad impact there. We also protect the website from an integrity perspective. There's lots of sites out there where HTML modules are used heavily, and that enables people the ability, or gives people the ability to add HTML to the page, which can also break the page or break the structure through JavaScript as well, or CSS. So there's some company security aspects as well to think of. And I think another main reason why it's important is it gives all stakeholders reassurance. Reassurance in that someone changes something, I have a process of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that this has to go through and be vetted first. And also, if something isn't up to a level of quality that one might like, you can reject that content change so it never goes live. The workflow APIs also, or workflow in general, should also give the ability to version items so that we can always roll back in case we want to go back to a previous point in time, whether for a disaster recovery or just because we're switching up content. So it gives a lot of additional powers from that perspective. So today in DNN, we have a couple ways we can create workflows. You can do it through a workflow management module. I put an asterisk next to that because it doesn't currently exist. There's been some talk lately, and I think a few of us are looking at making some contributions to build one so that in the newer versions of DNN 9, you can actually create a workflow, give it a description, and create states inside of it, or different approval levels, and assign roles through users and roles as approvers. In the interim, though, the only way to create these workflows is through a SQL script. There's, I believe, about 4 or 5 tables that power the workflow engine, or through the DNN API.
Mike?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Good, good. I have a question for you there. Again, I'm doing my magic here, So, so when you talk about workflow, are we talking about workflow within the same instance of DNN or across a dev site, a staging site, a live site?
Yeah, so this would be workflow within a single instance or a single portal.
Okay.
Yeah, not content or environment synchronization.
Okay, okay. Although I know that you are capable of doing that, but okay, let's leave it at for now.
Yeah, we can talk about that other one another time if you'd like.
Okay, thanks.
So we've talked about a couple different ways how we can create the workflows at the core level. But we can create them, but what can use them? Currently, right now, as we mentioned earlier, there's not a whole lot that I'm aware of that uses that workflow API. So if we want people to adopt these changes, we need to know how to implement them within modules. It comes down to a couple APIs that work together here that have been around in DNN for quite some time. There's the content type API. We talk a lot about content types these days more from a dynamic content type perspective. So things like liquid content in Evoke, open content module, too sexy. Those are all dynamic content types, or have the ability to create content types dynamically. The API also has, at a core level, the ability to define a content type in DNN. Today, out of the box, I believe tabs or pages are a content type, modules are a content type, files, and there's a few modules, I think journal modules, that were shipped with DNN at one point in time that use the content type API. All the content type is in DNN is basically a classification. I'm building a piece of content and we're going to give it a content type name of, we'll say, a banner or banners. You can also create content items inside of that content type. And from an API's perspective, all they are is a record and database that has some references to the page the content is on and the module that it came from, and then the ability to add content into the through a serialized object, or maybe reference an ID in another data store somewhere else. Maybe you already have an existing module that has its own table with data inside of it for its items. You can join the two together and kind of augment the workflow API that way. Content item also has a state ID as well. The state ID is what state that item is at in a workflow. So if you have something like a 3-level workflow, draft, first approver, second approver, it would say 0, 1, or 2 type thing. The workflow API kind of wires this all together and tracks your content. The one downfall that I've come across, though, is that all these APIs are kind of just built separately. And you need to write some custom business logic in your module or solution to tie them all together. That's for things like, hey, someone created an item in my module. I want to start the workflow API. Well, what do I do to that piece of content in the meantime? Do I show it to users in edit mode only and display a message that says it's in draft or under pending approval? Do I hide it and not show it until it's approved? And what do I do there? When I delete an item, does that deleted item then start a type of workflow, or is it deleted automatically? Is it displayed while it's in deleted kind of pending state until it's been approved for deletion? So there's a couple different use cases that we have to look at there and write custom business logic, custom code to tie them all together. Part of the, that provides great flexibility, but it also brings with us a big challenge in that if people are using these APIs and wire them all up differently, you could actually have a page where one module treats workflows completely separately than another and causing confusion for your end user. I'm going to just go into a sample module I built and kind of just give you a walkthrough of it. It's a proof of concept at this point in time. I actually built this about 2.5 years ago as a proof of concept then, and just recently updated it so that would support DNN 7.42 all the way up to the 9.2. It's open source on GitHub. I uploaded it earlier today there. I'll provide a link at the end of this presentation. And it's going to be a continued evolution. So as I mentioned, I started 2.5 years ago, just as a real quick proof of concept. So a lot of the code's in a rough state. It's not polished. It's not using some more modern up-to-date development practices. So what I'd like to do is over the next weeks and months, just continually update it a little bit as I learn more about workflow and turn it into a better kind of best practices module. Okay, so this is DNN 80 Foresight, and I'll just go into edit mode here. It's going to add a module to a page. So we're just going to add an item to this module. And this module just has a name and a description, just a very basic example. So we're going to say test name and hello to Doug. Sorry, hello to Doug. This module also shows the version history of each item as well and the state that an item might be in. So let's go ahead and save this. So I press save. You notice you don't see anything at all. This module, like I mentioned earlier, hasn't been coded for some best practices that I think from our investigation and discussions in the community can come up with, probably should say something like, here's the item, it's currently in draft mode or pending. The public won't see it and then hide it from review mode or something like that. So we can add that in the future. But right now you will notice at the top of the screen, there's a little 1 on that message icon. So let's just open that in a new tab. This is the default skin in DNN. And I think this is probably a skin widget that shows notifications and messages from the core API.
Yeah, from the messaging module.
Yeah, exactly. So the workflow API is tied into that, and it can send refers to as action messages, and that basically lets the module send a user or a group of users a message with some actions associated to it. So if we scroll down here, we'll notice that it says an item is created, we'll send it for approval. This message and this subject are all completely customizable within a module. So you can say whatever you want in there, be more descriptive, etc. So let's go ahead and submit this. And I'm just going to refresh this page. Because I chose content approval workflow, I think there's 2 states in that, and I'm a host user right now. They have access to approve everything, so it should show up here for me, which it does. So this message, once again, is customizable and kind of meaningless in its current state, but should probably have maybe a description saying, hey, this is an item from a module, the second module on this page. It's a banner, and would you like to approve it? Or maybe even pass through a message that the user who created the content wanted to supply with it, kind of like a check-in comment. You give a little heads up to whoever has to approve it. So let's just press approve. If we come back to the other page and refresh, the item should show up now, which it does. So that's a quick example of showing how the item goes through the workflow. This sample module supports adding, supports editing it, and supports deleting as well. So if I press delete, just say yes, I'd like to delete all versions of it. It didn't delete it from the UI because the delete action itself is now going through the workflow process. So if we go back to my messages, we should see the same thing show up in here. There it is. I can submit. So now I've basically taken it out of draft mode and submitted it. And as the approver, it should show up right here. I'm going to approve this and refresh the page, and now it should be gone. So that's kind of a pretty basic example of what this is. I'll show you quickly just the high level, the database tables and where the content lives in there. Well, that's loading. The code, it's on GitHub, as I mentioned. It's just a basic web forms module. I've got stubbed out for a web API controller, so I'm going to start adding in some more modern behavior to this very soon. But the big things that you'd want to look for in here would be in the component section. When we saw those messages coming up on the my messages screen, it's all of these workflow actions that are processing them. So if we open up the start action, for instance, when workflow is started, this class will run. And you can see here on state changed, you can run some code in here. There's the action message that I mentioned. Right now it's just hard-coded. Ideally, we make it a little more generic and powered with some additional metadata. And on state changed, on state changing. So there's a few things in here that I haven't implemented yet, and some modules may not want to implement. If you want to do some type of processing while something's moving from one state to another, you can do that though. So there are some flexible options. The other piece would be the workflow controller. So I basically create a class here that wires up the various portions of the workflow engine. There is, and it has links at the end of this, some YouTube videos and a couple of good blog posts from a few years ago online that I just watched, and this is how they did it. So I picked it up from the video and just kind of built it out. But it's pretty straightforward. It talks about starting workflows, what to do when the items are complete. The one other item of note is that all of these workflows have to be registered within .NET Nuke. We do that on install. So there is in the feature controller a upgrade option here. So when you install this, it's actually going to one by one register inside DNN, similar to an assembly, the manifest. Basically what it does is just put references in the database to say, you know, when this happens, here's the assembly to go call.
That would be per content type, the different workflow steps.
The different workflow steps would be per workflow. So it all depends on how the module was built. So if I built a module, and in this case, I have a workflow that's assigned at a global level that I use everywhere, but maybe I had you know, more advanced interface where there's two different types of items you can add, and one item goes to one workflow and one goes to another. So that would be an example of a module that's one content type, but maybe there's a flag or something on that content type. You know, if this is checked, send it to this approving group or this workflow versus another one. So it's got flexibility that it can do one per content type or many.
Awesome.
Or none in that matter. So here's the DNN 8 database, and I believe the tables start with core workflow, I think. Here they are. So it's actually content workflows.
There are workflow tables as well, but they're only for HTML module.
Exactly, yeah. So these tables all here from content items to content workflow states are for the core API. But if you go right down the bottom, the workflow and workflow states, these are only for the HTML module. So I think ideally these would eventually possibly go away and have the HTML module use the core implementation, which would be these tables here. If we open up the content items, just give you a quick view of that. All right, let's go right to the bottom, and we can see there's our workflow test TADUG. This content field, I've seen some examples where we could serialize an object, and instead of storing, you know, having a custom table for a module, you could just store a blob of JSON in here and then serialize and deserialize it. There's the content type reference, the page and module that's on, content key. In this instance, you can see some GUIDs here. This is what I'm using for a tracker to track the key from another data repository. And at the very end here, there's the state ID. So it will tell you at any given moment what state that content item is in. Content items also has some other good little bits of functionality in the API. We can give metadata, or create metadata for a content item. We can tag them. The workflow API, the other really good thing I mentioned earlier about auditability, everything in this workflow logs table, every state of a workflow is tracked. So if all the modules on your website use this type of behavior, you can have a complete end-to-end trace record of all content changes just out of the box on your website. So that's pretty brief example of what this is at a high level. You know, so next steps here, you know, by all means, if you're interested, try the workflow module on GitHub. I'd like to get some feedback if you do try it about, you know, some of these use cases I mentioned earlier, how you think the workflow ideally should work. Because what I'd like to get to is kind of building a little sample project that wraps a lot of this stuff up into a nice little package that other people could use in their modules, which would give us a nice consistent way of knowing how workflows work across the board if it's adopted. Also, contribute towards a workflow management module. I think this is probably one of the big main reasons why this was never adopted, because there is no interface to create and manage them. Through a database or an API may be fine for some people, but it's not for the majority of people that edit content on a website. After these types of things are in place, I think that bringing more awareness to what workflows are, not just from a developer perspective, but also from people who own websites. If more people were aware that DNN had this capability, they would probably be demanding this as a requirement on their projects, that we want workflow across the board here. And as I mentioned earlier, how we have so many different use cases and different ways that we can implement this, we can come up with some type of standardization, whether it's enforced at a core level or not, some type of standardization, and then start implementing that to other modules. Then we can have a editing experience that is consistent and standard across the board. So it's predictable for our editors, and at the end of the day, builds a better system. Some links that I'm sure Addison can share after the fact here to my website. We have a blog post up there. There's the GitHub module, or the module on GitHub, I should say, and some community blogs and YouTube videos that describe this API in a lot more technical detail than I am right now. So there's some good reading there, some watching there if you're interested in learning more. So, thanks guys for listening, and if you'd like to discuss it, anything here at all, now's the chance.
Yeah, you mentioned that you wanted to make some sample module to showcase that. If you decide that it makes sense, you could use one of the core modules, one of the simple ones, like announcements or something. That way we would have both an example of more modern development and an example in a core module of the user.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to get to is basically building like kind of a little connector in the middle where my own modules, my clients' modules, and as you mentioned, core modules too, could just kind of plug into this, so they wouldn't have to be rebuilt from the ground up. The way it works, we could just make a little tie between what's there today and this, and some tweaks in the interfaces, and it's pretty straightforward.
I think it's a good place to showcase, when we implement stuff and give an example of code. It's a nice place to put it.
Awesome.
I see one problem. You have to see this as a history of the workflow. I described it a little bit in the chat, but of course you were presenting and you weren't being able to read it. As we on the one hand side, we have to separate content items was created in DNN 5. Workflow was created in DNN 7. So they are not connected. They content workflow tries to build on content items, but we don't have to see this as one big concept. Content item was created for taxonomy to provide something to be able to implement or to structure content, to be able to really to categorize it using the Dublin metadata and stuff like this. So that's why you have this metadata table as well. It has never really widely been used, and but some different modules build on it, and in my opinion, not always in the right way, like Journal and others.
Cool. So from your perspective, do you think that it should be more widely adopted, or that since it's not, maybe it's not a good system? And
I think it's like many things from Microsoft and maybe some from DNN as well. It's nicely been implemented. It has never been reviewed afterwards, and it has never been considered. Is it really fulfilling the needs?
Yeah, I gotcha. And that's kind of some of the findings that I found when looking at it, where there are some gaps. I think it's really flexible, but from a structured perspective, there are sometimes too much flexibility, or not documented best practices on how to use it. So potentially this is an opportunity where if we start talking about it more and people think it's valuable, that kind of review could happen.
Let's first focus on content item. Content item, in my opinion, the idea is great because it implements something which is typical for content management systems to have a single point and a content item in the center. If you look at Joomla or many other ones, they are always working around one content item, and they simply vary using various of the structure for this item. While DNN is just working the other way around, it simply provides a framework, and then every module can do what it wants. And then we have a few interfaces like portable, searchable, to get things being put together around the framework. And content item could be another very flexible structure, for example, to provide a comment or rating and other items for content items, so you can create a system-wide services which are based on content item. That could be great, but it has never been reviewed for this purpose, and it has never been, and even the data structure has some flows in this area. So if you want to use it for this, it could be a great center for the next level of DNN, but we really need to review it first before we promote it. And the same is with workflow. Workflow is a very complex subject. I'm a little bit longer in IT development, maybe than you. And I came across a workflow, I think more than 25 years ago, where we had used it for various other situations, that especially for smaller companies, and I think DNN is still targeting many small and medium-sized companies. You always have the situation that you have a nice workflow, but people always want to bypass it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right?
You need a flexible option, because you need to say, okay, I have this workflow, but in this case, I need to modify it. And this is something which is not built into this engine. So in my opinion, we need to enhance it first before we can promote it, because if you now create all the UI for it and make all the work and then try to extend it, then it will be much more difficult.
No, I understand what you're saying. So as part of this, I've been using workflow and content APIs now for a few years in kind of my personal projects. So I'll definitely document some of this up and present it at one of our meetings for for people to review and get some thoughts on, because it's something I absolutely have people asking about all the time. Yeah, we're humans, and there are people that abuse workflows and will always. And they're not for everybody. Not every organization can be as mature as that, right? But in their simplest state, they do give us the ability to at least have a draft mode where we do have some flexibility to roll back content changes and that type of thing. So I think there's a happy kind of medium there where some people will adopt or find value there, and some probably won't, because, like you mentioned, people sometimes want to go around things.
But I think we need to separate between templates, workflow templates, and workflow instances, and then we are able even to change a workflow even while some elements are in the workflow, because they keep the old workflow instance, the original one when they were created. And if you modify it, only new items will get adopted, and then you may have a flag where you say this can be adopted by a supervisor, and the supervisor say, okay, but now the workflow gets a little bit modified in this specific case, and then you have, of course, different options, and this is not currently implemented.
Yeah, I hear you all. That's what I was kind of referring to earlier when we talked about that there's a lot of custom business logic that we have to wire up to make that happen. And I'm personally in the belief that I would like to see more of that business logic at a core level. So if people are going to use it, they're all using it the same way potentially, but then at the same time, that may not work out. So
in my opinion, workflow would only make sense if you have a central workflow management module or a persona by extension, where you can say, I have all my workflows, and you have maybe filtered ones for only a single for a single module, but at least there is some overview. And I don't like the current integration with the messaging module. In my opinion, it doesn't make sense to put it into notifications, because notifications mean someone has posted a forum or something. It's not a to-do item. We currently have messages. It means someone sent you a message, which is more important, and then you have notifications, which is less important. But a to-do list is something different. It should be something with higher priority and being separated from just the low-level information that someone has just done a file somewhere. And so
that's a really good point. And kind of following up on that, today, the only reason I was able to give that demonstration was because the skin that we were using pulled in those notifications. The persona bar does not have notifications inside of it at all. So if you're not using a skin that supports showing notifications, you can get into a situation where you don't have any UI telling you that there's some place somewhere for you to go to click on approve or reject. So yeah, I think there are some gaps like that, and that's kind of my intent by starting to bring this topic up, is get some feedback from everybody that knows about workflow, that sees value there, and kind of come up with some of the standards that we think are missing.
Toasts are also part of the skin, right?
In the skin, there's only the notifications that there is something in the message, in your message inbox, either as a message or as a notification, but it doesn't tell you much more. It doesn't on DNN software.com, it shows you, hey, this guy is following you or something, just a short text, but as it's like a tooltip. But it's not going much further. And if you simply ignore it, you don't know that there is an important action which needs to be taken care of very urgently. And there's also something that's missing, that you don't have a prioritization. Usually, if you have a workflow and someone is just failing to do his work in a certain amount of time, then it gets elevated. And this is not included in the workflow either, because otherwise, if you don't do workflow right, it becomes nearly useless.
Those are really good points, Sebastian. Especially about the prioritization. You look at your phone or something like that, right? High priority alerts get pushed to the top. You can configure that. Same kind of thing.
And I think that would be, of course, there will be always websites where some chaotic admins will they have everything in mind and they don't care about any workflow. But there are other people who work more structured, even in small teams, and just want to have lists, and they just work on their currently to-do list. And we need to, if we want to make this, and for those people, this could be a key feature of DNN. But it needs to be implemented correctly, because otherwise it's just a mess. That's my opinion.
No, I hear you. No, I agree with you 100%. That's kind of what I'm finding with a lot of these APIs I'm looking at right now, where they're not heavily documented yet. There's gaps there. Maybe they're left for a reason, or maybe they just we're going to come back later for some of this stuff.
Yeah, to be honest, those have been implemented by the DNN Corp team, development team at that time, and they were thrown over the just implemented. They have never been discussed with any other group, and so we now need to decide how to deal with it, because now we have the problem. This has never been reviewed by experts from various aspects, and I think that's the benefit we now have with a bigger core tech team, where we have people with different backgrounds and can say, hey, did you think about this? We used to have something like this in DNN 20 years ago, or something, not really, but or in other projects. What about this? Did you think about it? Sometimes it's just a small tweak, but sometimes it's a flaw in the concept. And if we now, for example, promote this using this workflow system which is in there, which is currently not used by anyone, as far as I know, except by Evoke and for the page release cycle, and then it will be much more difficult for us to provide an upgrade scenario once we get a better solution. I'm not
Yeah,
saying that
sounds
this
good.
is a bad solution, but I think it needs to be improved, either improved or replaced. And I can't say, I just had a look at the database, at the structure and say, okay, that's missing something.
Mhm.
And we can't even just implement it. So we need to enhance this background, and then or the background for it, and then we can consider how to create a UI for it.
Cool. No, I think that makes sense.
Promote it.
As I mentioned, I'm actually using workflows already, so I will have a UI and have piece of one in some of my projects already. So when the time comes, we can look at syncing everything up there. But no, I think that's a good point, and I'll start kind of running with that on some of the other channels. Getting some of these questions out there and getting various people's feedback, and maybe we can start going from there and looking at what makes sense from that perspective, if anything.
I'm totally open to discuss it and open a channel in the DNN tech team so we can discuss what are the needs, what are the shortcomings, how to get it better, how shall we start promoting it now, or shall we wait until we have a proper solution in place? Right, I just don't want. I love people who say, "Hey, there's something great. Just let's promote it." But I'd like to be considering first: is it really fulfilling our needs?
Yeah, no, I 100%. I think we should be doing that as a community, ongoing on everything that we work on. Right, like there's stuff in there, like you mentioned, that dates back to DNN 5 bits and pieces of it. Never been reviewed, at least publicly by people. So, other stuff too, we should be regularly doing refactoring and reviews. So, it's probably a good opportunity to start doing that.
Great.
Cool. Does anyone else have any feedback, questions, or anything like that?
Good. Okay. Can you guys hear me for the 10th time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Can't see you, but we can hear you.
Awesome. Okay. So we started from the end, so I'm gonna go backwards, no? So Mike, again, awesome, thank you very much. I'm gonna do an intro of you right now so I can put in the correct order this, So Mike Smeltzer is an IT consultant based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, who specializes in the DNN platform, full stack .NET development. He's a system integrator and a business process automation guy. His IT experience covers both operational and project work within many industries, including telecommunications, video games, healthcare, and insurance. Outside of consulting engagements, Mike also enjoys product development and is currently working to bring a new DNN control panel experience called Shine to the markets. Mike enjoys collaborating with others in all aspects of software development. He has a diverse skill set and is interested in governance and change management, front and back end development, usability, and automation. So that was the intro, Mike. And as we go backwards here, let's see. I feel like we are in the bizarre world, just going backwards here. So let's see what, okay. Resources. Okay, so if you want to check the news, what's going on in the DNN space in general, lots of resources out there, but I'm gonna include the monthly digest of our friends that, just right there, Clint Pedersen, monthly digest. Check out the monthly one so you can get the inside scoop of what's going on. You can also check, of course, David is the representative there. You should also check SoFright, which has an update segment there. Awesome, from our friends at SoFright. And you can also check our monthly chats, which Clint has checked. He realized that he was missing a certain name somewhere, and he fixed that. You see how useful that is, So, by the way, all those links, everything that Mike mentioned here, they will all be posted in the page of TADUG.org, and you can find all of that over there. Last one is I just want to mention that a nice presentation done by Matt Rutledge. He has spoken about, on the last SoFri, he has spoken about a new module development starting point using Yeoman. And again, hey, if you are a module developer, you should definitely check it out. That presentation was the last one from SoFri. Okay, so those are some of the resources that I wanted to share with you guys. Going backwards here. In terms of updates, I'm gonna just give one quick update. The DNN 921 release candidate has been released back in August 25th, and it's available. If you want to have a look, if you want to have a peek, by all means do that. For the smarter guys out there, when it's asked for the community, to check a new version of DNN and give their feedback, are we supposed to download, let's say, this release candidate and go through only the points that have been mentioned that had been modified, had been fixed, or should we have a more comprehensive approach? I mean, anyone has any input on that?
Yes. We had these discussions, of course, years ago when we had release candidates for DNN 5, 6, and 7. What needs to be tested? Of course, every area that's new, it always makes sense, or which has modified, it always makes sense to get as many eyes on it as possible. That means if you look through the list of changes, you should at least you should try, does it work as expected? Do I still see some issues here that would help us for providing a solid release candidate? On the other hand, for module developers and for site administrators, it also makes sense for module developers when you install your module, make sure that it works as expected, because there could be a side effect. And same is for site owners. If you have a complex site and you want to upgrade in the future, of course, it makes sense to the final version. It makes sense now to test it with a copy of the site, of course, and whether it's being upgradable or there are issues with the core itself or with some modules, and then you may notify the extension developers, or with your own module, you need to check what's the reason for it. So all those tests make sense. We might limit it in the future again to minor and major releases at the moment, because we're taking over the release process from the core. There are lots of changes, how modules are packaged, especially so those will show up during install, during upgrade. It always makes sense to test it, because otherwise, if you complain after the final release, it doesn't work, and we say, okay, now you have to wait for the next point release, because now it's released. You should have tested during the release candidate.
Awesome. Thank you, Sebastian, for that. Okay, so release candidate is out. By Monday or Tuesday, it seems that the final release of DNN 921 will be out. So that's just a quick
I think next week, or not this week, next week.
Yeah, next week, Monday or Tuesday. That's what that's what I've seen.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about, just mention a few new names that show up. Steve Karpik. Steve, are you able to speak, to talk? Just wanted to say hi and ask you what you're doing with DNN.
Hello. Yes, I mainly develop DNN websites. My main work is the design of museum exhibits for children's museums, science centers, and sometimes those places need websites. So usually I use DNN to do that.
Awesome. Where are you, Steve?
In Toronto.
In Toronto. Okay, perfect. Very good. Good to have locals as well. Sebastian, I have to mention you because again it's the first time that you come by. So Just want to mention for the ones that don't know Sebastian, he is the single most the person that has answered the most forum questions on the DNN forum, and he still answers them. So again, I salute you for that, Sebastian. For the ones that don't know you, I mean, can you give a bit of an intro about what you do and about DNN?
Yeah, I'm working with DNN for since version 1, not 1.0, but version 1, and I used it in German. So I was very happy when DNN 3 was announced to be localizable, and we got the first version even being announced coming out in 2 languages, in English and German. And I downloaded I said hooray, and I downloaded the first beta and switched to German and said, oh shit. Because it was a rather fish translation, and then I pinged Sean and said, "Hey, I am now taking over responsibility for the German version for the German translation, and that's something I'm still doing." And build up the German user group around the translation, and took over responsibility for a list module for some time, and for the release for the core module release process we had a couple of years ago. And so I was member of the DNN core team. So I've been around with DNN very closely for a long time. And of course, I'm integrator like many here, and my clients where I'm trying to get them get DNN as good as possible running for them. And one of the things, one of the problems I ran into with one client a few years ago was that he was still on DNN 4, while DNN was moving forward to DNN 7. And then when he wanted to upgrade to the latest version, he had a large user base. I followed the preferred upgrade path, and on every step the performance decreased by 50%, and at the end it was totally unusable. It was DNN 7.1, and then I tried to check out what the reason was, and it was SQL. And I'm also, besides DNN, I'm a SQL guy, so that's when I started to check the SQL. I connected with the developers at that time, especially Kahal, and we figured out how to get some of the improvements into DNN. But at some point, it wasn't feasible anymore, and then I released this as separate enhancement, which is still the TADUG script, which is released separately, but always following the DNN. So you can use it. Sometimes you can backport some of the SQL fixes because it still supports DNN 7.1 to current. But on this, the other hand, it also irons out a lot of issues, and it also provides much better performance.
Awesome. Again, welcome, Sebastian. Very good to have you around, and yeah. Very.
And recently, because I'm from Europe, from Germany, I had to deal with GDPR, the General Data Privacy Regulation of the EU. So I just started a group on this to get DNN fully GDPR compliant, or you can do it. We will provide advice how to do it, but also make it easier to to do it for admins, and this is some of the work ahead of us.
After that post, Sebastian, about the GDPR group getting formed, I mean, have you been seeing traction? Have you been seeing interest?
Yeah, we had the first meeting. We had the first meeting already. Other people then said, "Oh, I'd like to join as well." So we will. We now need to identify which areas we need to improve improve DNN, how we would do it, who will take over which, and so on. So it will take a little bit of time, but I hope that we will get a couple of enhancements in DNN 9.3, which is more or less perspective for the fourth quarter, and but there might be also some items being postponed and be released in the next year, because it's a wide area. You can do a lot of things, and we need to consider what makes sense, and even GDPR is still in process. So there's a regulation itself. That means that there will be work in the future as well.
Awesome, awesome. Good luck with that group, and again, let us know how it's moving along. I'd love to follow that closely. We have, a lot of our clients. They come to us sometimes and they ask, okay, what should I be doing, for the GDPR to be compliant, and I feel that we lack a bit of more information details about how to go the right way about complying with that,
Yeah, and you have always be aware that it doesn't only affect sites which are hosted in Europe. It affects everyone who has visitors from Europe, even if the site is hosted, and generally only targeting US customers. But if you have a significant or more or less significant share of visitors from the European Union, then of course you should consider, you need to consider having a look at GDPR. And it's not something really bad. It's something more common sense, but you have to understand the ideas behind, and we will try to provide some instructions on this as well.
Awesome. Okay. So we are almost wrapping this up, but just want to mention that I have some editions of the Code magazine to give to our members, and I have 9 of those. They were provided by the .NET Foundation, I assume. So I got a few copies of this. So I have 9 exactly. So if you'd like a copy, and just to give you an idea, this edition here is talking about Signal R, Entity Framework, Python, ASP.NET Core, Visual Basic Conversion to C#. So again, if you're a coder, you should definitely want one of those. Please send me your address if you want one of those to the address below, address@deskpaul.me. Hopefully there is still budget available in the TADUG pool, because right now the budget is going to my cell phone data. This is being done via my data. Okay, so hopefully there is still some money left after today. Anyway, that's one. The other one is this T-shirt. There's an extra one, and whoever gets a copy of this will also get into a pool to get this one T-shirt. Actually, not this one. This one is mine, but I have another one here packed, not weared. I didn't wear that one. Okay, so yeah, that's the announcement. That's a code one. What else? I think that's it. Thank you very much for the sponsors here: DNN for Less, Easy DNN Solutions, and Hufflin Software. I mean, Andrew, you're not here. You should be here. He helped put together the website, so I'd like to thank our sponsors. Guys, thank you very much for sticking around, for surviving through the hiccups. And with this, I learned that you should not try to reset your internet connection if you are half an hour or less, to do something like this. You should not try that. My internet is still blinking here. It's still not working. Anyway, anything else? Can we say our goodbyes? All good? David, P? All good, okay. Sebastian, thank you very much for being here. Paul, Daniel, Clint, Mike, David. I'm just mentioning the guys that I can see the face, but of course we have there, who do we have there? Jason and John, and yeah. Good crew today. Thank you very much. We talk again the first Wednesday of next month. Thank you guys. Have a good one. Bye now.